Imagine a man who could have been a king, chose to walk away from power, a warrior who led an army that barely had shoes, yet defeated the most powerful empire on earth, a leader trusted so deeply that an entire nation handed him the keys to its future. But here's the mystery. Who was the real George Washington? Was he just the calm, noble hero painted in history books, or a bold risk-taker who gambled everything on a revolution that could have easily failed? Tonight, we're uncovering the hidden story behind the man known as the Father of the United States. And trust me, the truth is far more intense than you've ever heard. Long before he became the legendary leader of a new nation, George Washington was just a boy growing up in the rough colonial frontier of Virginia. He was born on February 22, 1732, in a small farming family in the British colony of Virginia. Life back then wasn't easy. No electricity, no paved roads, no modern cities, just endless forests, muddy farms, and a brutal struggle to survive. Washington's father died when he was only 11 years old, leaving young George without the advantages many wealthy colonists had. But something about him stood out early. He was disciplined, quiet, observant, while other kids were playing games. Washington was learning surveying, mapping land across the wild American frontier. By age 17, he was already traveling through dangerous wilderness, sleeping outdoors, dealing with harsh weather, and learning how the land worked. Those years shaped him. They turned him into a tough, resilient leader who understood the land and the people living on it. But soon, his life would take a dangerous turn. In the 1750s, America wasn't a country yet. It was just a collection of British colonies surrounded by rival empires. France controlled huge territories across North America, and tensions were boiling over. That conflict would explode into the French and Indian War. And guess who got caught right in the middle? A young officer named George Washington. At just 22 years old, Washington was sent on a dangerous mission deep into the wilderness to warn French troops to leave British territory. Think about that. A 22-year-old kid sent into enemy land to challenge a powerful empire. The situation quickly turned violent. Washington and his troops clashed with French forces in what became one of the earliest battles of the war. The result? Chaos. Gunfire in the forest, ambushes, soldiers falling. Washington barely survived. At one point during battle, 2 horses were shot out from under him, and bullets tore through his coat. Yet somehow he walked away without a single injury. Stories about this moment spread quickly. Some soldiers began believing he was protected by fate. But Washington didn't see himself as lucky. He saw something else. He saw how powerful the British military machine was, and how brutal war could become. Years later, that knowledge would prove critical. By the 1770s, tensions between the American colonies and Great Britain were reaching a breaking point. The British government kept raising taxes and tightening control. Colonists were furious. They felt they were being treated like second-class citizens. Then came the spark. In 1775, the first shots of the American Revolutionary War were fired. The colonies needed a leader. Not just any leader. Someone disciplined, calm, experienced in war. All eyes turned toward one man, George Washington. The Continental Congress met to choose a commander. Washington stood tall in his military uniform. He didn't beg for the job, didn't campaign for power. But everyone in the room knew he was the right man. And just like that, Washington became commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. But here's the shocking part. The army he inherited was a disaster. No proper uniforms. Barely any weapons. Many soldiers had no shoes. Meanwhile, the British had one of the strongest armies on earth. Most experts believed the revolution would fail, but Washington had something the British underestimated: determination. The war dragged on for years. The Continental Army suffered defeat after defeat. Morale was collapsing. Then came the brutal winter of 1777 to 1778 at Valley Forge. This was the lowest moment of the entire revolution. Soldiers were starving. Many had no boots. Blood trails were visible in the snow where their feet bled from frostbite. Some soldiers deserted, others died from disease. It looked like the revolution might collapse entirely, but Washington refused to quit. Every day he rode through the freezing camp, encouraging soldiers, keeping the army together. Slowly, something changed. The soldiers hardened. They trained harder. They became disciplined fighters. Valley Forge transformed a struggling militia into a real army. When Washington became more than just a commander, he became a symbol of hope. In 1781, Washington made the boldest decision of the war. Instead of attacking British forces in New York, he secretly marched his army hundreds of miles south toward Yorktown. The move was risky. If the British discovered the plan, the entire revolution could collapse. But Washington kept the plan hidden. With help from French allies and naval forces, the Continental Army surrounded British General Charles Cornwallis. The trap was set. After weeks of bombardment and siege warfare, the impossible happened. In October 1781, Cornwallis surrendered. The war was effectively over. The colonies had defeated the British Empire. America was about to become a nation. Now comes the most shocking moment in Washington's story. After the war, many Americans saw him as a hero, almost a legend. Some even suggested something radical. They wanted Washington to become King of America. In many revolutions throughout history, military leaders seized power and rule as dictators. Washington could have easily done the same. No one could have stopped him. But instead, he did something no one expected. He resigned from the army and went back to his farm. He walked away from power. That moment stunned the world. Even King George III reportedly said that if Washington truly gave up power, he would be the greatest man in the world. And just like that, Washington proved that the new nation would not be ruled by kings. But America still needed leadership. The new country was fragile and unstable. So in 1789, the people turned again to George Washington, who was unanimously elected the first president of the United States. No one had ever held that position before. There were no rules, no traditions. Washington had to invent the presidency from scratch. He established the first presidential cabinet. He helped stabilize the nation's economy, and he carefully balanced political conflicts that could have destroyed the young country. Perhaps his most important decision was stepping down after 2 terms. He could have stayed in power longer. But he believed America needed peaceful transitions of leadership. That tradition lasted more than 150 years. In 1797, Washington retired for the final time to his home at Mount Vernon. After decades of war, politics, and leadership, he returned to the quiet life he always preferred. But history had already secured his place. On December 14, 1799, Washington passed away at age 67. Across the country, Americans mourned the loss of the man who had guided them through revolution and nation-building. He wasn't just a general, he wasn't just a president. He was the symbol of the American experiment. So here's the real question. What made George Washington different? It wasn't just his military victories. It wasn't just his leadership. It was something far rarer. The ability to walk away from power. In a world where leaders often cling to control, Washington proved something extraordinary. True greatness isn't about taking power. It's about knowing when to let it go. And that is why history remembers him as the father of the United States. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more hidden stories from history.